Imagine waking up in a room so white it almost hurts your eyes. Not bright in a comforting way, not warm, just white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, no windows, no clock. No shadows moving to tell you that time is passing. And then you notice something else. The silence. Not normal silence. Not the kind you hear late at night when the world slows down. This silence feels heavy, dense, like it's pressing against your ears. You sit up slowly. Your heartbeat sounds louder than it should. Each breath feels amplified. Even the subtle movement of your clothes brushing against your skin feels intrusive. Now imagine staying there for hours, for days, without knowing if it's morning or midnight. This isn't fiction. It actually happened. In the 1950s, during the Cold War, scientists became obsessed with one unsettling question. What happens to the human mind when it is completely cut off from stimulation? Not tortured, not physically harmed, just isolated. They designed an experiment called sensory deprivation. Volunteers were paid to sit in a controlled white room. The lights stayed on constantly. They wore gloves to reduce their sense of touch. Translucent goggles blurred their vision. The walls were nearly soundproof. At first it seemed easy. Some participants even described it as relaxing, peaceful. But the human brain relies on change to measure reality. Shifting light, sound patterns, movement. Without those changes, something begins to happen. Around 12 hours in, the first volunteer reported hearing a faint ringing, high-pitched, subtle. He assumed it was temporary, but the ringing didn't fade. It grew more noticeable because it wasn't in the room. It was inside his mind. When the brain is deprived of input, it begins generating its own. Soon after, he heard tapping. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. He stood and turned slowly. Nothing. The room was smooth and seamless, but the tapping returned. Behind him, his heart rate increased. He told himself it was stress, imagination, but imagination rarely feels that real. Sleep became nearly impossible. Without darkness, his body lost track of time. Minutes stretched. Hours blended together. He tried counting in his head, but eventually lost his place. By the second day, the hallucinations intensified. Flashes of light appeared behind his eyelids. Shapes formed in the corners of his vision. Faces seemed to press into the walls. He blinked, and sometimes they disappeared. Sometimes they didn't. Then came the whispers. At first, they were indistinct, just fragments of sound, but gradually they became clearer. He heard his name, softly. Right behind him, he spun around. Nothing. The whisper returned. Stay! He shouted into the room just to hear something real. The sound of his own voice startled him. Outside, observers noted increased agitation, elevated heart rate, rapid pacing. But he hadn't asked to leave, and that mattered. By the third day, something more disturbing happened. The whispers began responding. He asked, "Who's there?" There was a pause. Then a thought formed in his mind, clear and deliberate. "You are." He froze. "What does that mean?" he whispered. "You're not alone." The voice wasn't external. It wasn't sound in the traditional sense. It was internal cognition, experienced as something separate. And that's when panic truly began. The human brain is built to seek patterns. When it finds none, it creates them. Deprived of sound, it invents noise. Deprived of images, it invents visuals. Deprived of social interaction, it can fragment its own inner voice into something that feels like another presence. The volunteer began pacing in circles, arguing with something no one else could hear. "I'm hallucinating," he muttered. "Yes." "So you're not real? Define real." His breathing became shallow. Reality depends on shared perception. If others can see it, it's real. If others can hear it, it's real. But in isolation, there is no shared confirmation, only experience. And experience, even when generated by the brain, feels real. He began feeling crawling sensations along his arms, tiny movements under his skin. He tore off his gloves and scratched frantically. Nothing was there. But the sensation continued. The brain, desperate for tactile input, was manufacturing stimulation. Outside the chamber, researchers debated ending the experiment. Inside, his sense of identity began eroding. Memories felt distant. He tried to picture his childhood home, the layout of his bedroom, the faces of friends. They appeared unstable, like fading photographs. For a moment, he struggled to remember his own face. "Who am I?" he whispered. "You're the only thing left." That response shook him more than anything else, because isolation doesn't just remove external reality. It forces confrontation with internal reality. And that confrontation can be overwhelming. By what researchers estimated was the fourth day, he stopped resisting the voice. He began speaking to it calmly. "How long have I been here?" You stopped measuring. "What happens if I let go?" You won't feel alone anymore. His heart rate slowed. His posture relaxed. He sat in the center of the white room, completely still. Outside, researchers noticed a strange shift. His vitals stabilized, but not in a healthy way. It was a detached calm. Finally, they ended the experiment. The chamber door opened with a mechanical hiss. Staff members entered quickly. He was sitting cross-legged, eyes open, unfocused. They called his name. No reaction. They touched his shoulder. He blinked slowly. "You're loud," he said softly. He was removed immediately. Medical tests showed no physical damage. But psychologically, something had changed. In the weeks that followed, he reported persistent auditory experiences, not violent, not threatening, just constant. When asked whether the voice frightened him, he said something that unsettled the research team. "It's better than silence." The experiment revealed something profound about the human brain. Silence is not neutral. It is confrontational. The mind depends on input the way the body depends on oxygen. Remove that input, and the brain compensates. It increases internal activity. It amplifies thoughts. It constructs perception. Absolute silence isn't peaceful. It's deprivation. And prolonged deprivation can cause disorientation, time distortion, hallucinations, paranoia, and temporary psychotic episodes. This is why extreme solitary confinement is considered one of the harshest punishments in the world, not because of physical pain, but because of what your own mind can become when it has nothing else to focus on. Now think about this. When was the last time you experienced true silence? No phone, no background music, no television, no scrolling. Most people avoid silence instinctively. We fall asleep with something playing in the background. We wear headphones in public. We fill every quiet moment with noise. Maybe it's habit, or maybe it's fear. Because in silence, there's no distraction from your thoughts, no escape from your internal dialogue, no buffer between you and yourself. And if you sit there long enough, the silence may start to answer back. The volunteers in that white room believed they were strong enough to handle emptiness. But strength doesn't override biology. The brain is wired for stimulation. Without it, it creates its own world. The real question isn't whether your mind would react. It would. The question is how. Would you hear whispers, see shapes in the walls, relive memories you've tried to forget? Or would you meet a version of yourself you've never encountered before? If you were placed in that white room tonight with no clock, no sound, no change, how long would it take before the silence became unbearable? An hour? A day? Less? Because the most unsettling discovery of that experiment wasn't that the mind can break. It's that the mind refuses to stay empty. It would rather create something terrifying than face nothing at all. And maybe that's why we surround ourselves with constant noise. Not because we love distraction, but because deep down we're afraid of what might be waiting in the